Welcome to the Mindful Spark. My name's Dave, and in this video we'll be covering the science component from week 1 of the Reclaim Your Past, Reset Your Future series. In each of the 8 weeks of this series, there will be a science video which will cover the specific aspects that we're trying to achieve that week. So the meditation and the Qigong movement is targeting a particular aspect of our body, of our emotions, of our brain. And the science will help explain what's happening and why we're doing it, and how it means that we're more likely to have a more contented life, a greater sense of well-being and happiness. Every thought, every emotion, every physical sensation is interpreted by our brain. It's probably a good idea to have a little bit of an understanding of how the brain evolved and the different parts of the brain. So when we know that, we're better placed to know when we're doing something, how it has a positive or negative effect. Dr. Dan Siegel, the author of Mindsight, came up with a really good way of explaining how the brain evolved through his hand model of the brain. He showed that, say, the arm is the spinal column, and here in the palm, where it's divided in two, this is the reptilian brain, the oldest part of the brain, 300 to 400 million years ago. And this is divided into the autonomic nervous system, and it's usually two parts of it, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. So the parasympathetic is the rest, digest, feed and breathe. So that's when we're happy, when we're well, when we're feeling safe and secure. And the other side, the parasympathetic, is the fight, flight, flop or freeze. And that unfortunately is the state that most of us are in all the time. So what we're going to explain and deal with in the meditation in week 1 is how to be able to turn on the rest and digest, feed and breathe, the calm, the relaxation. So our body is going to go into healing itself, digesting food, repairing anything that needs repairing. That's the reptilian brain, and reptiles were only really interested in whatever's in front of them. Can I eat it? Will it try and eat me? Or can we mate? And it's not concerned with really anything else. And the next evolution is the mammalian or mammal brain. And that's where we have the hippocampus and the amygdala. So the thumb can represent those parts. And the hippocampus is the bit that gives us memory. And the amygdala is the emotional center of the brain, particularly dealing with fear. So you don't have to remember these components. It's just a good idea to know that they exist. The amygdala is really important because the more time we spend in this fight, flight, flop or freeze, the sympathetic nervous system, the more likely our amygdala is going to be active, and it will actually grow in size and become more sensitive. And when that happens, it affects our life because we're much more prone to being defensive and being maybe more aggressive and certainly more fearful. Mammals, they were able to form groups so they could remember who was in their group, who was on their side, who was on their team. And they could have emotions, so I care about you, but we don't like them over there. So it allowed for groups. And then the last evolution of the brain is the cortex. So this is usually known as the ape or the human brain. And if you notice, the cortex links in with the lower reptilian brain and the mammalian brain, so it connects it all together. And this allows for us to have planning, for prediction, for higher level thought functioning or executive functioning. And the cortex, our brains are also split into 2 hemispheres, and we can show that in this as well. That's primarily how our brain has developed up until now. And it has another really good aspect of this model, because you may have heard the phrase flipping your lid, blowing your top, or losing your head. And this can be represented very nicely, because what happens is when we go into this more emotional or more reactive state, we often inhibit, or the brain will inhibit, higher level functioning, and actually the cortex can get disconnected or blocked. So rather than thinking through our behavior and how we're going to act, we go more instinctively, and that can cause a lot of problems. As we learn to become more mindful, as we learn to do more meditation, it gives us a greater capacity to ensure that the higher level thinking in our brain stays intact and stays in control, and is able to manage the lower aspects of the brain and ensure that we have a greater capacity to have compassion, have empathy, be able to understand ourselves and other people, and therefore hopefully have a better outcome from any of our interactions. In this week's meditation, we're going to activate the parasympathetic, the feed and breathe, which will give us a sense of calmness, a sense of ease, a sense of comfort. And we do this primarily by learning how to breathe properly. So there's lots of different breathing techniques, and I'll cover many of those in this series on this channel on types of breathing. But for this first one, we're going to learn to do abdominal breathing, because when we're frightened, when we're in a state of anger, we're breathing higher in our chest. We're more sharper, shorter breaths. And that triggers the fight and flight. And when we're in that mode, there's a thing called the endocrine system, which produces hormones in our bodies. And when we're ready to fight for our lives or run away, we get noradrenaline, adrenaline, cortisol. And they're really good if you're going to, fight a tiger that's coming into your cave. But long term, they're poisonous to our bodies and our organs. So when we can learn to breathe deeper, abdominal breathing, like a baby would or a pet, you'll see that they breathe from their tummy. And what you could even try is if you close your eyes now and just notice your breath. Even through the act of noticing how we're breathing, the breath tends to slow down and become deeper. And as we do that, the body is saying, oh, I must be safe, I must be secure, because I can sit here and breathe calmly and deeply. So that triggers the brain to say, oh, let's start producing these good hormones like dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, and they're much healthier hormones and lead to greater levels of happiness. And low levels of some of these hormones can be found in many types of depression. The Qigong movement and the meditation in week 1 is going to help us to activate the rest and digest, feed and breathe component of our brain. And the more we do that, the amygdala actually gets smaller and we keep connection with the cortex. I hope that was interesting. Thank you very much.